BlogTalk Radio.
Welcome to Hell is for Children, a blog talk radio program for and by protective mothers with your host, Geerte Franken. So what's a protective mother? A protective mother tries to protect her child or children from their abusive father by many means necessary. Yes, you can call in. Are you ready? Operation Expose continues.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hello, are you there, Tammy?
Yes, I'm here. This is Marion speaking.
Okay, well, we'll bring on. I don't know what. Somehow I got muted all of a sudden. But what I'll do is I'll bring on Tammy first, and
yes.
Marion. I'll put you on hold for a second. And
I'm here.
Okay, so we'll talk to Tammy first. Hi, Tammy. Welcome to the show. I'm not sure where I got caught off, but I just wanted to introduce you as one of the moms who is involved in a Hague Convention case with Denmark, and you were able to have that Hague Convention, that bad Hague Convention ruling overturned in your case. So can you tell us a little bit about your situation? You're in the United States, and you're American. And what happened in your particular case in regards to Denmark?
Well, there was actually 2 Hague Convention cases. First case actually began because my ex had abducted our children to Denmark back in 2007. And back then, Denmark ignored our case, my filing, and over the years, I came into contact with other non-Danish protective parents who also had their children abducted to Denmark, and many have not seen their children again. At the time when I was in Germany trying to get them back from Denmark, I had called the German authorities and was told by one that I actually had to go to Denmark and try to reunite with my children, because this happened to many German parents whose children were abducted to Denmark. Even with The Hague, they couldn't get their children back from Danish men and from the Danish system. So I spent many years in Denmark trying to get my children back and to be reunited with them. And how it ended up in the second Hague Convention case was my older daughter ran away from Denmark, ran away from my ex during one of his violent episodes, and ran back to California with my family. And I was still in Denmark with my current husband, not my ex-husband, my current husband, and trying to reunite with my younger daughter. And the second Hague Convention case resulted where I was never informed, and my ex, just on a filing on his word alone, the U.S. authorities sent out a armed police SWAT team to seize my American daughter, and both of my children were born in the United States, and I'm an American as well, and deported her back to the country that she had been abducted to in the first place. So, yeah, I've been involved in 2 Hague Convention cases with completely opposite results.
Wow. And so where are you now in all of this?
Oh, right now, this is why I don't go into too many details, is in our California case, that was just overturned, and it is now being looked at by the Supreme Court to see if, because our case has been published after it was overturned, after my oldest daughter was deported back to Denmark. So we are still fighting it here from California.
So when I started the show, after the introduction of the show, you hear this the start of the show, and it ends kind of with this little scream. Did you hear me explain the entire Hague Convention idea, or I understand there was some dead air just now?
Yeah, I didn't hear anything at all. So
okay, so maybe
I'm hoping
we should.
Your listeners heard.
Well, I'm on Facebook with Marion, and I see that I had some dead air. So maybe we should explain a little bit to the to our listeners what the Hague Convention is, so they have a little bit of an idea. So when there's an international custody case, the Hague Convention Treaty was actually put into place to prevent child abductions, right? And so the original idea of the treaty is really good, but what's happened that is abusive fathers now actually use the Hague Convention Treaty to abduct children via this treaty. So the opposite is actually happening of what it's supposed to do. And the way they do that is that so the fathers often allow the mother and the children to depart to their country of origin, to the country of origin of the mother. And once the mothers and their kids arrive, the abusive fathers accuse the mothers of parental abduction. And the Hague Convention then deports these children back to the father's country because the treaty mandates that this is where any custody disputes must be resolved. And the Hague Convention does not look at domestic violence and child abuse when deporting children back, which they actually should, according to Article 13 in that treaty. So once the child is then deported to the abusive father, and the mother is suddenly made out to be a child abductor and gets arrested upon crossing the border often. Other scenarios happen as well, right? There are also cases in which mothers won Hague Convention trials, but judges in the other country overrule the treaty anyway. And then there are cases where mothers won Hague Convention trials, but fathers are allowed to abduct the kids to the other country. So there's a lot of aspects to this. And I was like just telling all of this, but apparently I didn't have my mic on, so I'm sorry about any dead air that happened at the start of the show. But I just wanted to have our listeners give a little general introduction of what the Hague Convention Treaty is. And if you want to read some more of these cases, you can go to www.protectivemoms.net. There are some cases there that you can read. And interesting to note also that the United States has not signed on to the United Nations Treaty on the Rights of the Child. It's the only country, together with Somalia, who has not signed on to this treaty, which is a disgrace. But in your case, we're dealing with Denmark, and Denmark is part of this treaty. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, as far as I'm aware, yes, it is part of the treaty.
So, so when you started in your own case, you met all these other moms, right? So, tell us a little bit about the other moms that are involved with these Hague Convention treaties. Are they all experiencing the same thing?
Well, yes, very similar pattern from Danish authorities. So, in my case, for instance, I'd never lived in Denmark or been in Denmark permanently before our children were abducted by my ex there. But the pattern and other protective mothers from other parts of the world were involved with Denmark for different reasons, but the pattern of the Danish authorities was still the same. As you hinted on, once the foreign mother was in Denmark, either trying to reunite with her children or was living in Denmark and had gone to a domestic violence shelter, because the batterer had been beating on her or the children, then the Danish man would then start using the system, Danish system extensions of his fists. He'd start making false police reports about the foreign mother, either that she was an illegal alien in Denmark or that she herself was trying to abduct the children in Denmark, or just fabricating other completely absurd false accusations in order to try to terrorize the mother and have the foreign mother deported from Denmark without her children. It appears that the Danish police and Danish authorities, of course, they look at the Danish parent and then the non-Danish parent and unilaterally side with the Danish parent, especially because a lot of times the foreign mothers don't speak the language, can't read the language, are traumatized. They're not provided translators. So it is a scenario that the Danish men really know how to take advantage of. And that's how, when my attorney had filed our case in the EU and the UN, I was contacted by other protective mothers from around the world, and I realized from that point that there was a system, a pattern of violations, EU and international violations by the Danish system and Danish authorities, and that's how it all began.
It seems like the Hague Convention judges are really not looking at any evidence when they're looking at these cases. Have you noticed that in Denmark?
It's not just Hague cases. It appears that Danish authorities will not look at a foreign mother's evidence, irregardless of what type of case it is. It's quite unilateral. So it's Hague cases and just all across the board. If there's evidence coming from the Danish man, they will accept that evidence, and they will use it unilaterally, and they will write it in any of their decisions. If it's coming from a foreign mother or foreign children, even, they will ignore the children's testimony and hospital reports and social services reports and so on. They will again ignore even both the non-Danish mother and the non-Danish children each and every time in favor of the Danish man.
Wow, so this is really a discrimination against women going on in Denmark, sounds like. But I can tell you from my own experience in the Netherlands, the same thing is happening. So it seems like there's a global pattern of discrimination against women. And but the good thing about Denmark is that they are signed on to the UN Treaty Against Discrimination Against Women, yes?
Yes, that is correct. There were several people, including myself, who filed with the UN, and we've gotten a case through that you will be following up with Marion. But yes, they have ratified both the CEDAW Treaty and the Optional Protocol.
Yeah, so the CEDAW Treaty, when we talk about the CEDAW Treaty, that stands for, tell me, what does it stand for? The Convention on... go ahead.
The complete elimination of discrimination against women.
The complete elimination of discrimination against women. And this is important for our listeners, because if there are mothers listening right now from all over the world figuring out what to do in regards to these treaties, you need to go online and go and see look at all the different treaties that the United Nations has. It's not just that treaty, but there's several other ones as well. And really look at that, because if the country that you are battling against is not part of this particular treaty, then you can't file on those grounds. For myself, for example, once I heard about Marion's victory against Denmark on the CEDAW, I realized, well, maybe I can do that too. And then I went online and I looked, and I noticed that the United States is not part of that treaty. They have not ratified that treaty. They have not signed on to it, which means that I cannot use that particular treaty for my case, which is, a real bummer. And it's unbelievable, because the fact that there's no treaty in the United States against discrimination of women is outrageous. I started looking at it, and they don't even have any type of implementations for civil and political rights. It's unbelievable how backwards the United States is. So that's one of the things that I wanted to point out. Make sure to all the moms that are listening to actually check what treaties the country that you're battling is signed on to before you start putting your case together to the United Nations. But thankfully, Denmark was signed on to this. So mothers who are all over the world having their children being held hostage in Denmark by abusive fathers, they can use this treaty to try and get their kids back. And we'll have Marion on in a little bit, talk about her case and how she was able to accomplish that. And, then the moms that are fighting Denmark can use her case in a way for their own case, right? And you can also refer to cases that have been successful when you submit your own claim. So that's pretty cool. So, but you actually, in your case, your kids were taken to Denmark, and they're still there. Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
And so you battled this within the United States.
Yes.
Am I getting that correct? So
Yes.
So did you take your case to lower courts, to family court, or how did you go about this?
Okay. Well, I didn't go about anything. When we started the show, my older daughter had actually run away without our knowledge after one of my ex's violent episodes while my current husband and I were in Denmark. And my ex filed a hate case in the United States without me ever being informed. And I didn't realize that was even possible, that they would unilaterally make a decision or actually have a court hearing without notifying the American parent. I find that ironical. But anyhow, none of the exceptions to the Hague in terms of violence or human rights violations were considered. And again, just based on my ex's word alone, a SWAT team, an armed police SWAT team, was sent out to seize my older daughter, my American older daughter, who was born in the United States, who had been abducted to Denmark to begin with, and who had been living in a situation of domestic violence herself, was deported back to the country she'd been abducted to begin with. And that's how we ended up in the California system. And I have to add that even though the United States has not ratified the treaty, and Denmark has, we've had, as you will hear from the next speaker, we've had all kinds of problems with Denmark. And in the United States, we did have an ability to appeal. And with a judicial system that was that at the appellate level fairly considered our evidence and overturned what my ex was able to do at the trial court, family court level. And that's where we are today. So the good news is if there is a protective mother, a survivor of domestic violence in the United States, is I highly encourage to gather all the evidence, and if you can't afford a lawyer, to submit it yourself, appeal. The key is to appeal, and that's how I think also we educate the trial courts in what's going on internationally, that there is this double standard, that there is that foreign countries, even ones on their face who have ratified all the human rights treaties and who claim that they're the least corrupt country in the world and they're the happiest people in the world. Well, you've got propaganda machines on par with North Korea. That's not necessarily the case. That they have to look at the actual evidence and the facts of the case and give all citizens the same equal rights to be heard in court, especially as it relates to their children.
Mhm. Wow, I'm just flabbergasted. So we have all these treaties, but they're actually not being implemented. They're not being heard. So where do we go then? I mean, who do we complain to? if the United Nations treaties, right? Go ahead.
Well, I think what helps is, as we did with the courts in the system in the United States, is educating the courts. Right now, in our case, we have a few domestic violence organizations who are amici in our case, and they help educate the courts here. They help educate the politicians. They help educate our leaders to say, that, hey, we're not asking for more. We're just asking to be treated equally, to be treated fairly. And And I think that is the beginning, because I think there's this illusion that, because the treaties have been ratified, because diplomatically that everyone's saying the right stuff, that somehow that's the reality on the ground, and it's not. And that's a lot of cases because a lot of domestic violence survivors are so traumatized. We're the lucky ones that made it this far.
Absolutely.
So in a way, we're the voices of all the protective parents who have not made it this far. And there's a lot of people who don't know that that even though on paper you have all these rights, that you go to a foreign country and that's not the case. And even in your own country, you can have authorities get fooled, and so you have to be able to, with the help, any help you can find, get all your evidence together, document everything, and try to submit it to the proper authorities to try to have the case heard, appealed, overturned, and so on.
Yeah, one of the things that is really interesting that what you're just saying is that one of the big roles that we have is actually educating judges about the Hague Convention Treaty. That by itself is outrageous, right? If you think about it, here we are, moms who are totally traumatized because our kids are taken, and we go to court and we present all this evidence, and the courts basically don't know what the treaty is. It's like, what's that about? I have a mom in the Netherlands that I know of who won both her Hague cases, right, the lower court and the appeals decision, and her kids were abducted again, and then she had to go to that country to, and this was actually the United States. She had to come to the United States. And the father had somehow gotten full custody of the children, even though the Hague rulings were in place. And she went to the court and said, "Hey, but I won my Hague cases." And the trial judge said, "What is the Hague Convention?"
Yeah.
And she had to go and explain it. And then it had to go to another judge, and that judge then finally said, "Oh yeah, well, I know what the Hague Convention trial is, and I see that you won these cases, so here you have your kids back." But this is after she spent another $50,000 and was stuck there for 3 months in a hotel room, completely traumatized, battling these cases in the United States. I mean, it's outrageous. Really, any judge listening right now, please educate yourself on what the Hague Convention Treaty is, so you don't put these moms and these children through these traumas. And it's just crazy to me that we have to go and tell the justice system how justice is implemented internationally, or how it should be implemented. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I've myself, AODVC helped write a letter to sponsor me to go to law school, so I'm only on my second semester now. And this is only my opinion, is I think that if you look at the history of whether the judicial system in the United States or whatever foreign country we're dealing with, I think it helps to look at the history. I think I still believe that, at least with the U.S., it's with our that we are one of the best judicial systems as compared to how it used to be with the UK. So, and however, I think just with all anything related to human nature, there's always room for improvement. I believe that in our system there's a limited amount of money, and there have been a lot of cuts. And so a lot of judges are forced to hear several hundred cases a month, and with the sheer amount of reading to do, I think we've overstressed our judicial systems. And whether that's a political decision or not, I don't know. I believe that if we look at the history, at least I can only speak about this is only based on 2 semesters, and then my own experience in 2 semesters of law school and my own experience, is our judicial systems are always evolving. They're always learning, and they sort of follow wherever society's going. And if you look at the history of women's rights, even in the United States, the rights to our children and so on, that's really only come about since the 1970s,
Mm-hmm.
where we have the ability to be able to leave abusive husbands, to be able to work, to be able to have any rights to our children at all. So I think these things, it's not so much that the judges do not want to be educated in this. I think judges have to be educated in just about everything, but, it's wherever they have their experience and, wherever they see the most cases. And hate cases as opposed to other types of cases, there are not so many. And,
so maybe we should have specialized judges in this field then. Would that be a fair conclusion?
Yes, actually that was discussed by one of the amici, is that there needs to be judges that have been trained in domestic violence, and prosecutors and social workers. It takes a village. It's the whole team and the judges to work with the families so that there is the best outcome for the children, and that you don't have batterers that are able to manipulate the system in such a way, both in their own countries and in the foreign countries, in order to create these outrageous outcomes. And I think we have to be patient with the judicial system. I mean, there were, I'm sure, the judges who helped in our appeal, they had hundreds of pages to read. And our case was just one of hundreds they had to deal with. And they took the time. And so I think it's a matter of making sure to gather this information as a group and to present it to the powers that be and to say, hey, this is what the judges need to be effective so these things don't keep happening. And if you look at the history, again, of, this is because I've taken a little history in law school, is that a lot of times social change, things got better when the powers that be and the judges and other authorities got educated and were made aware of what is actually going on.
And it goes beyond domestic violence. They also need to know what the Hague Convention Treaty is by itself.
Right. And judges
I
still have to go home. They have their families. They have their own children, their own lives. So they only we only have their attention for a certain period of the day, and they're only human. So, in the beginning, I also had, I think we expect our judges to be gods. And I think we have to step back and realize they're just human like us with only a limited amount of bandwidth. And if we can just gather, all of the facts of the different cases of the pattern, and we present it in a very concrete way to show the pattern of behavior, like we did with Denmark, because, again, we got our first UN case through. We had EU decision against Denmark, actually, a few years back as well, that forgot to mention. And here we brought it to the attention of the authorities here in California, and they overturned the decision in our case. I think it's about protective parents bringing the facts to the attention of the powers that be and being reasonable when we do so and saying, hey, there can be a better way that these cases can be handled so there's not so much suffering, and the domestic violence survivors and their children are not tortured either directly by the batterer or through domestic violence by proxy, as you touched on, which is the batterers using the system as extensions of their fists to try to continue to torture us and our children.
Yeah, but you're very forgiving towards the courts.
No, it's
Tammy.
not forgiving. No, I'm not forgiving. No, it's more of dealing with how it is.
Well,
because
it seems
there's,
I respect everyone's views and opinions, but I would like to add to what you're saying, and that there's not necessarily always such a positive agenda as saying, well, they're just too busy, because in my case, I presented a lot of evidence about child abuse, child molestation, and neglect by experts, and it was simply these judges simply ignored it, and these experts were ready to testify, and they were just like, oh no, and just go figure it out in the United States. And they didn't even look at the fact that my green green card had expired and I couldn't go back to the United States. So there's also seems to be an agenda against women or something.
Yes,
you know?
yes. I wanted to add, yes, it's not a figment of your imagination. And what I meant was, if you look at our case, the appellate court decision that was just overturned, that overturned the lower trial, and it was published. The appellate court specified to the trial court that, and as a precedent decision, that the trial court must look at exactly the same thing happened, right? In our case, in many other cases, they're not looking at our evidence because the law does not specify that they must.
Well, Article 13 does, right? Article 13 states that if a child faces harm upon return, and that could be psychological harm, it could be physical harm, or if the child is very resistant to going back, then they shouldn't be sent back. But
yes, you are correct. You are correct.
And in my case, I had all the evidence of abuse. Yes. I had a child who was resistant, which the judges all stated, yes, we have a resistant child here, and yes, there's expert evidence of abuse, but we'll send her back anyway. So what's that then?
Yes, and that's where what I got out of reading the appellate court decision in our case that was published, which is the trial court judges are not trained to look at this evidence. They're not trained in this. And it takes courts like the appellate court and perhaps Supreme Court to specify to the trial courts, yes, you must do this because this is how it's been done all this time. And there hasn't been the outcry or the appeals that are coming through the system now. Now, we can to look at the past, there were probably many socio-political reasons that this was done because, we live in paternalistic societies, yada, yada, yada. But I think looking backwards other than to understand the why and to make peace with it, I think that's good because you are correct, which is exactly why in our case, SF had gotten our case published that requires the Hague courts in cases where there is a grave risk and there's evidence that the trial courts need to have a hearing to look at the evidence. They can't just blindly go on one party's word alone.
So how do we make sure that they actually do this then? Because there's not an oversight, a judicial oversight committee at the UN level that holds these judges responsible for the way they are handling this Hague Convention treaty. I mean, that's a real big issue I find because in the Netherlands they just deport a child every other day because they're not looking at Article 13, and every other day a child is separated mostly from their moms, from the primary caregiver, because they don't implement Article 13, and there's no one saying, oh, well, you're not supposed to do this, Judge so-and-so, That's a real issue. And when I filed my complaint with the UN in 2013, this is what I said. I said we need a judicial multidisciplinary oversight committee that actually holds these judges accountable, and it should be a committee with which you can appeal your case. If you lost both the lower court and the appeals court, you should be able to appeal that at an even higher level and say, hey, these judges in my countries are not adhering to the treaty, right?
Yes. I think your idea that you touched on in the beginning was spot on because I've heard that echoed here in the United States, which is to ensure that there is a group of judges that are trained and doing what we're doing now, which is involving domestic violence advocates all over the world and uniting as a group as we're doing now, and educating the public, I don't think we get much out of attacking the authorities on past behavior because they've been doing what they were trained to do, what they've always been doing, and if they'd done anything different, they would have lost their jobs because the powers that be have dictated this is how they're going to behave in our cases. I think the idea is what we're doing, which is educating, appealing cases, bringing cases to the attention of the EU, the UN, and attempt to bring it to the Inter-American Court for Human Rights. I think attempting to bring it to higher authorities, politicians, as we did with the EU and the US. I think because it's the first time we're really all pulling together internationally as a group, and we've all compared notes, said, hey, this pattern is all over the world, because human nature is the same regardless of language, culture, religion. So people are going to do the same bizarre stuff irregardless of what system you're in. And we look at, hey, we have come a long way, since the 70s. And there are a lot of people out there who support what we're doing and who are actually in the domestic violence activist arena, who want to make things better. And it's sort of we're kind of starting something new, and we're opening their eyes in a way that the powers that be and the judicial system can understand and that they can swallow. So I think what you
it's interesting that you're saying that, because I said, I think your view is very positive, and I'm happy about that. But one of the things that I came across with the Hague Convention Treaty regarding Article 13, right, that article that we discussed, where the child doesn't have to go back if there's great resistance or possible harm, they actually implemented a new ruling on that in 2012, where there's a particular statement it says, if there's any domestic violence or child abuse, that doesn't fall under Article 13. And it's like, what? So Article 13 is now only applied when the child is sent back to a country where there's war and possible torture upon return, or forced mutilation in some African countries or something, but not if they're sexually abused by their fathers. How does that?
No. Well, with our appeal, as you can see in our published case, that's not the case in California. The appellate court specifically specified domestic violence against the American parent and or the American children, or their children, could be also non-American children, or sexual abuse. So, and our case was published as a precedence case. So I think there is a lot of there are a lot of misconceptions out there about domestic violence, about understanding what domestic violence is, about understanding that the tactics the batterer does and uses are similar to, what happens in wartime. And I think in our case we had a few domestic violence organizations that did amici to educate the court in domestic violence in terms of tactics and behavior and understanding the mentality of a batterer and their use of the court system. And I think that is something that across the board, what listeners can do is try to get that information and use that in their own court cases. And that's exactly why our cases have been published, is take the cases that we won in the EU and the UN and on appeal, and anything you can get your hands on to help educate your own judges in a respectful manner, that, hey, there can be a better way to do things, and there are other courts that are doing it in a different way, and this is why. So, and I think that's where getting organized, putting this information in a central location, pulling in different authorities that are working in The Hague, that are working at the various domestic violence organizations, pulling everyone together with that information, and then doing this push as we've been doing.
Well, let's bring on Marion and see how she handled her Hague Convention case. And let's first see how she got to that. So I'm going to put her on and put you on hold for a little bit so we have a chance to hear what her story is all about. So, hi, Marion. Can you hear me?
Yes, Greta. Hello. How are you?
Hi. Welcome to Hells for Children. And, we talked a little bit yesterday. You are from Austria, and you also had a Hague Convention case with Denmark, correct?
This is correct, yes. And in principle, I would not be in this situation, and neither would be my son, if Denmark would always have complied with their own laws. They have been violating Oliver's and my rights since 2010. We, in the end, ended up with child kidnapping from Austria to Denmark in 2012. And, I immediately had to file a Hague Convention case against my son's kidnapper. And unfortunately, all the rules of the Hague Convention have been violated by Denmark.
So the father of your son took your son to Denmark because he is from Denmark, correct?
In principle, it is this that my son's kidnapping was planned in advance. His father was here in Austria, checking out for 1 month what we are doing, and he had professional helpers who on April 3, 2012, together with Oliver's father, kidnapped my son. And tomorrow it will be 4 years since my son is gone.
Wow, that's a long time. So he's 9 now?
Yes, exactly.
So you started a Hague case against Denmark to get your son Oliver back to Austria. And what happened then?
Yeah, the problem is that Denmark, for example, did 6 weeks rule.
I'm kind of losing you. You have some bad connection. There seems to be some kind of clicking noise. I don't know what that is, and every once in a while you're kind of dropping out. I also dropped out, but that happens. But just to be aware of that, and I'll notify you if that continues to happen. Maybe you can call in from through another line. But he took your son to Denmark in 2012, and you started a Hague Convention case against him, and then you lost that. Is that? Am I understanding that correct?
Yes, it is that way that Denmark first didn't comply with the 6 weeks rule, which means that a judge has to set a date for a court meeting. And this did not happen. And instead of getting an invitation for a trial, I got an invitation for a case about visitation and not about a Hague Convention case. And I needed to contact the Danish Minister of Justice in order to get this changed.
Wow.
And then Denmark first had a court meeting set for September on the 5th and on the on the 4th and on the 6th of September. Until this time, I had some contact with my son. And after that, in principle, Danish authorities continued to make every contact, prevented every contact to my son.
And so you lost the Hague Convention trial, and then did you appeal it?
I did, in principle, appeal the district court's decision because Denmark or Danish authorities alleged that my son would have never changed his habitual residence from then after we legally moved back to Austria in 2010. And this is very contradictory, as Danish authorities had removed my son from their register in July 2010. And later, when the Danish father kidnapped my son, they alleged that my son would have never moved to Austria and he would have never lived there, but we have lived there for almost 2 years.
Bizarre. So it's bizarre.
It was the foundation for the ruling. In principle, they alleged that my son would not have lived in Austria properly. So. Wow.
It's outrageous. So you lost the appeal, and then what did you do?
The next step was that my son's grandfather opened a Facebook page in February 2013. It is denied have
Your phone connection is not very good at all. So I'm going to what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a break and have you call back in from another phone or from another number and try again. And so I'll put on a little break and we'll be right back. Okay, let's do that.
Okay, thank you.
And okay. And we're back with Hell is for Children, and this Blog Talk Radio show is all about the plight of the global protective mothers and trying to get their kids back through failing court systems worldwide. And today I'm talking to Tammy and Marion, and the show started with some dead air. I want to apologize for that. Sometimes these technical issues happen. Hang in there with me. It's okay. My producer told me that it happens quite a bit with these shows, so I'm not going to stress about it too much. But I want to use this opportunity to thank Bobby Biesinger from World Integrity News Network for providing us with this platform to share what's going on in our cases as protective mothers, trying to protect our children from abusive fathers and the way they often manipulate the global family court system to terrorize us, to continue to terrorize us and abuse their children by manipulating the system. And we want to prevent that, and we want to fight that. So we're talking to our guests today in what we can do about that in these international custody cases. And we were talking to Tammy. She was telling us her story in regards to Denmark. She was fighting Denmark from the United States. And then we switched to Marion, who is an Austrian mother, and her child is being held by an abusive father in Denmark. And we had some connection issues, so I want to bring her back on. She's now on another phone. And let's see if that makes a difference. Marion, can you hear me?
Yes, Gerda, I can hear you. I hope the connection is better now.
It sounds good. So let's continue where we left off. We were talking about the appeals case and all the issues that happened there, and the fact that you also lost the Hague case in the appeal, and then you took matters to a whole other level. What did you do to continue to fight for Oliver?
Yeah, the problem was that Danish authorities had disregarded the best interest of the child. They never took any of the facts into consideration. They also had documentation for my son regressing after he had been kidnapped. And I then decided to do a petition with the European Parliament. And I also sent in a petition to the UN CEDA in Geneva in August 2012. And now in February, I got the results. Also after 4 years of discussions and fighting with the Danish state, the UN decided that my son must be given back to me. And they ordered my son's immediate return to Austria.
Well, can I interrupt you and just congratulate you on that enormous victory, and congratulate you also on the resilience with which you have been fighting this. First going through Hague Convention, lower court, then the appeals court, and then taking your petition to the United Nations in that CEDAW treaty that we talked about that is against discrimination of women, and you're just incredible in your resilience and your fighting spirit, and I hope that inspires our listeners to just continue. Don't stop fighting, right? It's amazing that you've won, and so. But how come he's not back yet?
First, I want to say thank you very much, and I want to encourage all women, never give up. Never ever, because it's about our children. And I now have to challenge the Danish authorities or their government officials. In principle, do not seem to understand the meaning of immediately. The United Nations stated exactly that they have to return my son immediately to Austria. They also confirmed all the facts which I always confronted the Danish courts with. And the problem is also that Denmark now has been made aware of the fact that this is no single case. The UN has a high amount of cases pending against Denmark, and Danish authorities always alleged that my case would be a sad single case. This is by no means true, and I hope all parents which listen to this show, especially people who have a problem with Danish authorities, do take their cases to the next level and also file a case with the UN committee, because I think it is very important that we join each other, that we make people aware of the big problem there is. And I have to point out that when you take the Danish system, it is many foreign mothers who have a big problem with Denmark. But there is also a very high number of Danish mothers fighting since years to protect their children and to keep their children.
That's a very important point, because when I'm on Facebook, I see these American moms post these pictures about Denmark and how that's the happiest and the best country in the world. And I know your story and stories from other Danish moms or moms dealing with Denmark, and I just shake my head and, I comment underneath these pictures and saying, you don't know what's going on. Please don't think that that's a great country, because you don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons why we have this show. And while we're on that topic, there's this video going around. It's a documentary that was made, about 10 years ago or so. It's called No Way Out But One. It's about an American mother who escapes the corrupt American court system to the Netherlands with her children. And then she sought asylum, and she got the asylum, and which is great. But now we get all these American moms running off to the Netherlands thinking, well, that documentary shows that I'll be safe there. Please note, for all the listeners, it's great that documentary was made. It's an awesome documentary. I highly recommend everyone watch it. But please don't think now that the Netherlands is a great place to come to, because in the last 10 years since that movie's come out, just about, actually the reverse is happening. Most asylum seekers do not get asylum when they come here. So, we want to make sure that one of the things that we want to use this show for is to really show the audience what's happening in these other countries, right? So in the case of Denmark, no, it's not a great country to go to if you're trying to run away.
I totally
right?
agree. Yeah, I totally agree, especially as it is a fact that Denmark has the highest number of violence against women within the European countries. Yes, it is the member state with the highest rate. It is 51% of the women who have already experienced violence. And you must not forget that there are always children involved in these cases. So when a woman and mother is exposed to violence, it very often also involves the children. Mm-hmm. And I personally cannot recommend anybody to have children in Denmark or with a Danish man. I would be very careful, and I would inform myself before moving to Denmark.
Yeah, it's a really good point, and I've talked about this with mothers who are in other international cases as well. Like we always talk about it and say, like, if we had only known that we would end up in a situation like this, it's better if you're pregnant. Go back home and have your kids there and stay there for at least 2 or 3 years before you go anywhere else with that child, because you might very well find yourself in one of these awful international custody battles in case your marriage doesn't work out. It's important but you're in love and you think, oh, life is going to be great and I'm married and I'm going to have a kid and it's all going to be awesome. But if it doesn't work out, you are in a big, big problem, right?
Yeah, it depends very much on the country you move to. But in my case, I was very naive. I really thought, as a European citizen, if I move from Austria to Denmark, I would have the same rights in Denmark as I have in all other European countries. But this is by no means true. I have experienced discrimination already before I had these problems with the Danish courts in regards to an elite custody, which they transferred retrospectively to my son's father after we had moved to Austria. So I think we have to be more careful about where we go to. We have to inform ourselves. And this idea of everybody has the same rights within Europe, it's not true. It is an idea, I think, which politicians sell to us. But in fact, when it comes to deciding which person will get custody, like it is in Denmark, Danish men will always get custody transferred to them. And the foreign woman will lose custody, no matter if there is involved violence, abuse, or other things.
Oh, so it's a lot of
false allegations made by Danish fathers, and it doesn't matter if they make these allegations towards the police, the court. They are taken as facts, and if a woman comes and proves that this or that is happening or has happened to her, it doesn't help. They ignore it. The Danish authorities ignore the facts.
And not even not only the Danish authorities, because when we talked yesterday, we were Skyping yesterday, and you were telling me about your whole United Nations process, and because I asked you like, wow, it's taken 4 years. Why has it taken so long? Mm-hmm. You were telling me that the United Nations also was trying to extend deadlines and postpone things. No?
This is a misunderstanding, because I have explained that Denmark, in principle, asked for several extensions. And this means that the UN was forced to give them these extensions. I think they have certain rules.
I see.
And
okay.
And Denmark in the end got almost 2 years of extension to answer to the letters the UN sent to them and the questions. So
wow.
My case could have been decided 2 years ago, but Denmark has prevented this by prolonging the case unnecessarily and by asking for these extensions.
Wow, it's just amazing how Denmark has been battling you on this, and one must wonder why, right? I mean, why does Denmark have this agenda? Do you have any ideas on that?
Yes, I have, because Denmark, in this case, demonstrably has violated its own laws. So this means it doesn't mean if it's the Jugendamt, I think it's called child welfare or something in English.
Child Protective Services? Mm-hmm.
Yes, exactly. They all, the courts, even in ministries, they have violated their own law in order to help the Danish citizen. And for example, they even produced a paper to there is an original from July 22nd, 2010, for example, and they produced a new paper in order to make the other paper disappear, the original, which was in my favor, and then they added into the court papers a new paper for this July 22nd. I'm sorry, this is so confusing. It was not explained very well.
But basically, what you're saying is Denmark was trying to obstruct your path to justice on every turn.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
And so, what is the when that happens? What does the United Nations do? Do they say, "Hey, you're part of this treaty and you need to adhere to it," or how does that work exactly?
It was this way that I have collected all documentation since 2010, and I sent in all my case files. The UN went through the case and really took the facts into consideration, and the UN then confirmed that my son is solely Austrian citizen. They confirmed that there is no valid custody for the father in Denmark because all decisions which have been made in Denmark are illegal because they did not have international jurisdiction.
Wow.
The UN also confirmed that my son's rights and my rights have been violated and that we have been discriminated. They stated that this case is no single case, that Denmark also must prevent that these things can happen again, and they have to educate their caseworkers, their judges, their lawyers, and they have to publish this decision in several in a lot of channels which are available to them.
So maybe this is why they were fighting you so hard, because they realized that if you would win, that they would have to change the system, and they didn't want to.
This is possible, but they already changed, for example, their citizenship law after my son was kidnapped. My son is born Austrian citizen according to Danish law because I was an unwed mother. I have never been married to the father. I had sole custody. There was no father registered for, I think, almost 5 months. And still, Oliver's father alleged that my son would be Danish citizen. And this is incorrect. And I'm very happy that the UN now has confirmed that my son, also according to Danish law, is solely Austrian citizen.
It is outrageous to me that it's taken you 4 years to prove that your son was born in Austria.
No, not
like...
that he was born. No, not that he was born in Austria, but that he was born as an Austrian citizen according to Danish law in Denmark. Yeah, because it's important.
Yeah, okay, I see what you're saying.
Sorry.
I see what you're saying because you're Austrian. Yes, I see what you're saying. But
exactly.
They could have still just said like it's on the birth certificate, right?
Yes, but on the birth and name certificate, there is no father registered. There's only my name and my son's name. And they still alleged that my son would be a Danish citizen and that he would have been born that way and that he would have received, for example, Danish citizenship automatically because he has a Danish father. So it is, in principle, it's nonsense, yeah?
It's outrageous. It's absolutely outrageous in your situation. But I'm so happy that the United Nations actually took a look and took the time to go through all the files. And this is kind of brings up that point that Tammy was making too, right? Because in these family court systems, it is true that the family court system is maxed out. And this goes globally. This goes for all countries around the world. And then that's one of the reasons why they don't actually read the entire file. In my particular case, I don't think that the American judge in my daughter's case has actually read the file. It's once I started talking to her in the hearing, I realized she either hasn't read the file or she's just pretending that she hasn't read the file. But these cases are so complex, and they sometimes span multiple years. And yeah, we really need a better justice system globally for our children. They are the most important assets for the world. They are the new generation that's going to carry this world. And if we don't take the time and the effort to look at each case in detail before making custody decisions, then we're going to end up with a really, messed up new generation,
Yeah. The problem is that Danish authorities do not even look into the ability of the other parent who seeks custody, if he even is capable of having a child in his care. And, for example, my son has never lived with his father before. Oliver lived for 5.5 years always with me. And they still transferred a custody to a man they didn't know anything about. And they didn't even question why he now is looking to get custody transferred to him. So the best interest of the child is by no means ensured in Denmark.
Yeah, it seems to be a global issue, right? It's like my daughter lived with me for 10 years, and I have no criminal record, no issues, and all of a sudden she's gone. And is she still alive? Who knows, right? I mean, what's that about? They don't. It seems to be a global pattern of discrimination against women in this regard. That children seem to be handled as the men's property or something.
Yeah, it seems that way. But what you say is interesting because you are told right now that you do not know if your child is alive. And in principle, I do not know either if my son is healthy. I do not know where he is. He was. In principle, they took his identity from him. They removed his name. I do not get any information in regards to my child since, I think, 2013. And in my view, Denmark must act now because they have a child in Denmark, which is an Austrian child. They never had international jurisdiction for this child. Nor for and also not for the case. Austrian authorities and courts are internationally competent. This was decided within 3 Supreme Court decisions, and the UN has now also confirmed this fact. And you also must think about the fact that Oliver's father has been convicted for serious assault and child kidnapping. And in fact, Danish authorities do not protect my son, since he has been kidnapped.
It's very basic to me when I'm hearing your story. The father should now be locked up and criminally prosecuted for child abduction, and your son should be with you right now.
He was convicted in Austria for child abduction and serious assault. The problem was, and this was also criticized very much by the United Nations, Denmark should have extradited him to get prosecuted in Austria, but the problem is that Denmark alleged that the father would have a custody in Denmark, and that because of this he has done nothing wrong.
They turn it around on you. It's outrageous. Exactly. So when you started your United Nations CEDAW case, you had help from Tammy, right?
It is this way that we have been in contact due to, there are some groups on, Facebook, so other social media, and we got to know each other, and we decided to help each other by, searching the internet. What can we do? Where can we file petitions? We even tried together to file a group case against Denmark at the ECHR. This is the European Court of Human Rights. But the Danish office, in principle, used to divide and conquer method and split the case up into single cases and dismissed all cases. This was 10 years ago. Yes. They succeeded with their tactics, and it is very lucky that it happened this way. But I can only tell everyone, if you don't try, you will not know what the outcome will be. So search on the internet, use other parents who have been going through the same or similar situations, and what I think in regards to Denmark is that the other European member states finally have to do something about what is going on in Denmark, because Denmark has a lot of opt-outs, and it does not only regard the cases involving children, but it's also economic stuff which they have opt-outs for. And in 2013, in June, a delegation from the European Parliament has been visiting Denmark, and has met with approximately 40 parents who have lost their children to the Danish system. It was a very shocking evening, but it was also, we could learn a lot. And what I would like to mention is that the behavior of the Danish government, Danish ministers and politicians has been really outrageous because they did not want to meet with the delegation. And in my view, it shows how little in principle children mean to Danish government officials and the government itself, because I think the children are the most precious we have, and it needs to be protected. And this is by no means happening in Denmark. And
well, let's bring... go ahead.
No, therefore, I think that they should have met with the members of the parliament. They should have talked things through. They should have shown that they are interested in changing. Because
otherwise
very,
they're
very
human rights violators. Yeah.
In fact, they are. But the report from the European Parliament, which came out, I think it was in October of 2013, anyhow confirmed that Denmark has to change their family law system. The problem is that until this day, what I know, nothing has happened, and things even have become worse.
Wow. That's depressing to hear. Let's bring Tammy back on and do some brainstorming on what we can do. I'm going to put her on right now. Tammy, can you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay,
yep.
Great.
So you helped Marion put her case together, and you've been working with other moms in these types of international situations as well. What can we do to get Denmark back on a more positive track, do you think?
Well, for me, I was lucky. One, in terms of my background, I'm an engineer, and also that I'd gotten warned by German authorities in Hamburg about Denmark. And then when I'd gone to the embassy to tell them about what was going on in Denmark and how all these foreign protective parents were losing their children, they said I had to come back with evidence, hardcore evidence. And so since 2007, even though it's been, as you know from what's published in our case, it's been a nightmare, I've just been methodically gathering the evidence. And I think that is what I recommend for protective parents all over the world is what Marion and I went around doing, because also Marion did a lot as well after we met each other, is we went around looking for other protective parents that had these issues with Denmark. When I was in California, and that's how we met, is via AODVC forwarding me other protective parents dealing with the United States, for example.
What does that abbreviation stand for?
Oh, American Overseas Domestic Violence Center.
Americans Overseas Domestic Violence Center. And so if Americans have international custody issues and domestic violence issues, they can contact that center. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so that's very important.
So I know this sounds very uber geeky in strategy, but that seems to why we were able to get through to the EU, and Marion's first case pushing through to the UN is giving them the evidence in each of the individual cases and then connecting the dots to the authorities, showing the pattern. This is the pattern of the Danish police. This is the pattern of the Danish judges. This is the pattern of these authorities. This is the pattern of our exes, the false allegations, whether they're trying to report the foreign mother as an illegal alien or false reporting her as abduction when they themselves did the abduction, or for violence and so on, using some of the bogus theories around trying to cover up that they were violent. And I think the key is wherever the protective mother is in the world, is it's easy when you're a victim, to want to stay private, to hide to where you think it's safe, whether it's in this domestic violence center or in your apartment or wherever it is you're at. And I think the point is, as Marion pointed out, is what we did is reach out, find other parents, other domestic violence survivors with children, find other people and start collecting your papers, collect your evidence, carry a tape recorder if you have to, and record the meeting and transcribe them.
Then you can also start a website where you put your collective stories on there because, as you pointed out, Tammy, when you present your case to the United Nations, it's really important that you show this pattern. You can't just say, this is happening to me. You have to actually structure your petition in such a way that you show that pattern, and the only way you can do that is if you know other victims, and this is not just for international cases. I also want to put this out for for example, all the thousands of American moms that I know who have lost their children through family court. Please don't stay isolated. Don't be embarrassed about your case. Right?
Yeah, and
don't be afraid.
I wanted to
go
add
ahead.
as well. So forgive me. I wanted to add as well. What was great about the American judges in our appeal, for example, is even though the United States has not ratified the EU, treaty or the UN CEDAW treaty, when we presented our evidence and the findings of the EU, for example, and that we were part of this group, all that work we did is why one of the reasons the appellate court overturned what happened. It's not wasted time, even if the treaty is not 100% adhered to by your country. Still find the group, submit the evidence, and then when you're in your own country, you can use that to also help either overturn laws or create new law or have the judges overturn and put in what they call as an estoppel, stop the order from the foreign country that has abused its power against you and your children, because you can demonstrate, hey, here's an international body. We submitted this, maybe because, the United States is not a member of the EU, but by me as an American being and other Americans being part of the group case with the EU, they came to that decision. And that decision we could then submit to a United States court to say, hey, see, this is the pattern. And in my opinion, is again, we have to recognize that we do live in paternalistic societies. Most of the judges, most of the politicians are still men. And in my opinion, they don't understand yet, when you have good men who would never do these things, they would never lie, they would never be violent to their children or their wives, it's hard for them to comprehend other men who behave in a psychopathic manner, who are violent, who are capable of that kind of behavior. So that's why it's important for any mother who's currently in this nightmare to take a breath, find the strength. It's like you're in the middle of a blizzard, and if you stop, you'll freeze to death. So you just keep going. You keep moving, and you're going to make it. Collect the evidence. Carry the tape recorder. If they don't give you papers, because a lot of times that's the tactic authorities do, they just don't simply give you the documentation, carry a recorder, an audio recorder. Do it quietly. Marion talks about if you're too frightened to advertise or you're under court order not to talk about the case, you could create a general website to attract other protective parents who are going through that same nightmare, so you can quietly collect the evidence, submit it to the proper authorities, submit it to the proper international body. And even, like I said, as I used in our example for American mothers, American protective parents, is all our work in the UN, we submitted in our case to the Court of Appeal, and that's what helped open their eyes. And that's what I encourage, instead of trying to take matters into your own hands and hearing about disastrous results. It is hard. It's going to be hard. But you stay strong. You collect the evidence. You unite with people around you. Reach out. And then locate also activists who have the courage to stand by you and submit your papers and your complaints to as many international authorities that are willing to accept them.
Well, this is something that we as European moms can also do for, when American mothers speak out, they often get gagged, right? They deal with judicial retaliation through gag orders. And we as European moms can put a website together where we put their stories on there, and they can't stop us. So this is a way for the American mothers to still get their stories out, and they cannot be held personally responsible, because we're doing it for them. So what is an American judge going to do about us publishing their cases, right? These are all. I'm just brainstorming out loud.
I would not encourage any protective mother to go against any judicial order for her own protection and her children's protection. However, we can unite globally.
Mm-hmm. These gag orders are illegal anyway, right? I mean, you have the First Amendment in the United States, so.
What it takes is appealing these gag orders, but again, a lot of these protective parents are so traumatized and so frightened. And again, it's finding the right attorneys, finding the right judges, appealing these decisions so that the powers that be in the various judicial systems, in this example, the United States, can take a look at these cases and help correct any wrongs that there were. I think that it is, it takes what we're doing now. And again, our appellate judges really stuck their necks out and courageously overturned. And there were two men that were part of the three judge court. So just because I do not believe that just because these are women's issues that we should be frightened of all men. I think there are good judges, good male judges out there, and it's just a matter of we have to slow down. And as Marion pointed out, she went through several years of this nightmare. I've been going through this since 2007. We've been collecting thousands of documents, and that's sort of what it took. But we do that and we present it and we get these decisions published in hopes that moms like you and other moms don't have to go through what we go through. And if they're going through it now, again, our suffering is not for nothing, and the suffering of our children is not for nothing. And we are still fighting for our children. But I think the key is uniting, collecting all the facts, presenting them in a way that the powers that be in the judicial system and our politicians can understand and can digest, and that giving them, as we are discussing, different options, legal options, that they can use to try to try to correct the wrongs that have happened in all these cases.
Now, you have already collected all these stories, Tammy. So let's say there's a mom listening right now who's very inspired and wants to go to the United Nations and is going to write out her petition, and she needs those cases from you to back up her own petition. What can she get in touch with you, or
yes. Yes,
go ahead.
Absolutely. Or Marion has a public website where she collects all the documents, all the foreign parents, for instance, dealing with Denmark, as well as any of the international moms, for instance, that AODVC forwarded me about the United States. The ones who give permission, because not everybody wants their own papers handed out. But I introduce them to the other parents that I know of, protective parents from that country, from that region, and then, absolutely, anything that we have the permission of the other protective parent to hand out, we give a template for the various bodies, depending on whether it's the EU or the UN or within the United States. And I give them the contact information of various domestic violence activists that I know of, or even the email addresses and phone numbers of folks in the EU and the UN, and from there the mom can use that as a template to put together her petition, as well as to try to locate other protective parents dealing with the same system to try to show the systematic pattern of violation.
So should we then contact you? And if I wouldn't want you to get thousands of mothers contacting you now, because I know you're really busy with your own case as well. But how do we do this?
Yeah, my suggestion is, Marion has a website. I think you also have a website. And I think, Marion, you've got all the documents I have, if I recall correctly.
Marion, are you still there?
Yes, I'm here. I'm listeing.
Yeah,
I think another possibility is we can create a third type of website that's more generic. But I think you've got a good website up. I think Marion has. I think a few of the other protective parents who have e-union cases have as well. I think, anyone can always contact me. I'll take the time, even if it's just to forward them to the link where they can get everything.
Okay.
But yeah, I think that.
How do we get in touch with you? How do we get in touch with you, Tammy?
Yeah,
that's the issue, because I don't want your inbox to get overflowing.
Well, no. I mean, Marion, what do you think?
I think this is not the right place to discuss stuff like this, because I think the Women's Coalition, for example, is a really good place to join each other. The Facebook site you mentioned, which Oliver Sprendet has made for him, is a really good source for all people who need to know something about the UN, the EU, or the case of my son. A lot of information about Denmark, what to get informed about, the laws in Denmark. But it is not the right place to put stuff like this on. I suggest for every single mother to make a Facebook page on her own with her case. This is very important. And what is extremely important, which I wanted to add before, was that you always need to ask for all your case files in the country, so from the country which you have your challenges with. Because in my case, for example, Danish authorities did deny me to get all my case files, because in principle they alleged it would damage their foreign affairs if I would get all papers. You can see they have information which would in principle hurt their foreign affairs and diplomatic connections with other countries. So we are sometimes in these cases on a very high political level, and it is very important for every single person to have as many case files of their case as possible, because sometimes things go wrong and you can't prove it if you don't have the paper you need. So please.
That's why I also recommended recordings, because some of the tactics they use, as Marion pointed out in her case, is sometimes they just simply don't provide written documents. So carry a recorder.
But this is not legal. This is not legal in all countries.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yes, I agree. Yeah, so but in order to give the foreign, the protected mother a chance to prove something, that's why I recommend buying a little tape recorder, because you can submit the audio and transcribe the audio. So that is something to submit as evidence that the situation did occur. And Marion's idea is a good one, if you agree, Gerda, is that the Women's Coalition PAC at gmail.com. So TheWomenCoalitionPAC at gmail.com. Because if there's issues around Denmark or California, I will hear about it, or if it's Denmark and Austria, they'll contact Marion or any other protective mothers from Austria dealing with Denmark or Austria. So the team that has put the Women's Coalition website, they've got a website, so you can Google the Women's Coalition and just request, you're from this country and you would like more information about this, and I'm on emails from some of the leaders in these different, in the Women's Coalition, and I am familiar with Safe Kids International and the Women's Coalition. They've gathered women from all over the world, the mothers, and they report on their stories. So I think that is a starting place
Right. So if there's if mothers need to show that pattern, and they go to the Women's Coalition and contact the folks in that organization, they can get some type of record of this pattern and other
they can
cases.
Get contact. Yes,
okay.
I got email addresses of other protective mothers in Denmark and in California. They will put people in touch with each other, so that as what occurred in Denmark, you're able to put a group case together, and help each other collect the evidence.
Should you always put a group case together, or you could just file for your own individual case? What do you suggest?
Well, I can only speak from our experience, and as you know, we faced retaliation. But part of why we were able to convince the EU and the UN and a court of appeal, right, where we're dealing with the paternalistic groups, right, with a lot of men, is we were able to show a systematic pattern of violations.
Okay.
And as unless a mother is lucky enough to have been provided, all the doctor's reports and all the social services reports and all the court orders that clearly show that there is some violation, which, as you know, with authorities who behave this way, they do everything possible to sabotage the situation so it fits the outcome that they wanted.
Right.
So, in a way, the protective mom has to understand what she's dealing with, and it's easier for the authorities to blow off and to explain away one or two cases. But when you're dealing with, 5, 10, 20, 30, 100, 200, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, they can't explain that away.
But if you contact the Women's Coalition, they're not going to give you all these individual other cases, right? How does that work then?
When I went, the Women's Coalition and Safe Kids International worked together, and I went and I contacted them. Then I got introduced to other protective parents. Yes.
So you just put a link to these other cases in a document that you attach to your own petition and say, look, it's happening to this mom, and it's happening to this mom. Yeah.
Well, what we did, and this is just one example, but what worked with us is, as we found cases, I had created a document that was like 300 pages long, where I made a table of contents like a book, and then I had the screenshots where I included the documents of each of the other cases that we found either through news clippings or online. And we also contacted, if we were lucky in the protective parent, we were able to locate them and find their contact information, and they actually wanted to join us. We created their own petition that they were coming forward with us in a group. So the only thing you can find is a screenshot of a website or an email or, anything that shows that you're not the only one.
Wow.
That you're not the only one this is happening to you. And if you're lucky and the other parent, protective parent, is not too frightened or traumatized to come forward with you, then do a petition with them or to include, and then they submit all their evidence. But at the very least, include anything you find that the same pattern is happening to others in your country.
Okay, that's very, very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, it's almost like being a detective.
It's so much work. It's like a whole full-time job to do all this work, and that's why it's so taxing to the mothers who are already traumatized and they're missing their children and are dealing with the grief around that, and they're usually also financially destitute. So it's quite a work list that we are giving them. But I think to realize is if you don't do anything, then you're going to just be sitting in that grief. So that's not an option either. You have to do something. Now, and the authorities who know nothing about us, who know nothing about the batterer, who know nothing about the situation, that we have to present hardcore evidence in order for them to be able to help us. And it's because their hands are tied. They can be faced with court battles or criminal charges
they can be prosecuted for slander or defamation if they just go with our word alone.
Mm-hmm.
So it giving them the power and the ability to help us. So we have to, and it is very, very hard, but what is happening to our children is even worse, and I know it's hard, but, know that take strength that you're not the only ones, and it will change and it has changed already, because you find enough good people out there in positions of power who go, okay, this is what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Well, that's and you both are pioneers in this regard. You're opening the doors for all these other thousands of mothers who've been, separated from their children and who sometimes have no contact at all. So, I'm very grateful for the work that you all have been doing for all these years, and I really want to thank you for that effort and that resilience and not giving up and doing all this groundwork, because we can all tag on to that now, and then we can inspire other mothers to do the same thing and become this tsunami of hope, as I call it. And kind of to go on to that, to continue on that note, and this is a question to both of you, really. How can we organize in such a way for particular Hague Convention cases? We have the Women's Coalition. Do we just connect with them and build on that, or do you think we should have a separate organization that just handles Hague Convention cases? Because the Hague Convention cases can be very complex, and with all the different treaties and countries and all that. Any thoughts on how we can organize for ourselves and others in the future?
Well, I can't speak for Marion, of course. As you know, AODVC had helped get me into law school. And what I had discussed with you and others was on graduation, creating an international organization to provide legal services and other services to protective mothers and their children all over the world, precisely that specializes in international law and these cases, and to help bring together judges across all countries, get them properly trained, meet with politicians in the UN, in the EU, in the United States, and help unite them to find a better way of doing things. So I think ultimately, at least for me, I think the Women's Coalition, as Marion pointed out, is a great forum now to start, because they really have tens of thousands of contacts and followers and protective mothers and activists who they are working with already. And I think, anybody they hand off to what, could be created in the future, I think that is, I think we work together, because we don't have to reinvent, and a lot of times a lot of protective parents will find us through these channels, through domestic violence centers, through their own lawyers who may have their own hands tied. And because, in order to find solutions to these issues, it's really, we have to find international solutions across the authorities of both countries. We have to make sure we have the foreign ministries and the State Department, for instance, on board as well, and they're not having meetings that are relaying the opposite to what we're trying to achieve.
Right.
And the Southern Poverty Law Center a few years ago came out with a report that these fathers' rights and men's rights groups are hate groups. That what they're doing, they're called abuser rights groups. They're organized. They've been going around spinning this nonsense, which is why a lot of protective mothers like us are terrorized and battered and crushed by the system. And so we have to counter that with the facts and with science, with the science behind what happens to our children in these situations, the science behind how these batterers think and how these batterers are misusing the system and how they're manipulating the system. So we counteract that with education and science and facts and evidence. And we do that on a global scale, uniting all mothers together all across the world. And I think that is exactly what you said. A tsunami is one of the natural disasters that humans cannot counter. So we become a tsunami. And for the sake of the future generations, and our own countries, and if you look at any positive change that has happened in any culture in the past several thousand years, it's because of the women, pulling things up, the mothers. Things got better, and it's with uniting with the good men, the brothers, fathers, husbands, sons, who do not want to see the women they love suffer this way. We unite together to pull our individual countries and our systems up. And I think that's how, that is the hope for the future, and using our cases to do it.
Very well put. Thank you so much. Marion, did you want to add something to that? We have about 2 more minutes or so. Did you want to add anything to that?
In my view, it's the responsibility of the government to ensure that the Hague case is executed the right way, and it does not work to wait a long time and build new groups. It's not the way to save the children which are concerned now and which now have to suffer. So I think we have to address our government, and we have to request immediate changes. As long as we don't do that, and the public does not know about the problem, things will not change fast enough.
Yeah, and maybe we can all gather in one big, huge global case against the UN on all our cases combined, the thousands of cases all in one petition. That would be quite powerful as well, right? To show that this is a global pattern of what I call paternal fascism. And it must be battled. So like you said so well, Tammy, this is the future. This is the future of our planet that's at stake here. If we don't help mothers and children, then what kind of world do we have? If mothers and children are treated this way, these violations, these human rights violations, impact generations to come, and we must prevent this abuse from continuing by any means necessary, really. So. Yes. Well, I want to thank you both for attending the show today, for being my guest, for telling your story. I think we got a lot of information across to our listeners, and I hope it's helpful. So if you have any questions, if you need help, contact the Women's Coalition. And again, you were talking about the American Overseas Domestic Violence. That's what they're called, yes? The American Overseas
Domestic Violence Center.
Yeah, and they're also very helpful for these international cases. And Marion, people can find you on your Facebook by Googling your name, yes?
Yes, they can find me, I think, on Twitter or on Facebook. And they can go to our homepage, which is called The Danish Trap. And there they can get a lot of information about especially the Danish system, what has happened in our case, and things which they would need to get informed about in case they would like to move to Denmark.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you both so much for being here, for being here with me to talk about particularly Denmark. And once again, congratulations to both of you on being able to overturn these cases. And let's hope you both have your children back home as soon as possible.
Thank you. You as well.
Thank you very much, Gerta.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody, and we'll see you next week.